Now, if you've ever had about a $40 budget for a PC case, you'll know that the selection's pretty grim, and it's quite difficult to find a case that doesn't look like an OEM Dell from about 20 years ago. But I may just have found an amazing budget option, which is also mATX. And it kind of made me think, after building in it, why is mATX not more popular? Because it's a really awesome form factor. Enter the Thermaltake Versa H17. Now, there are three versions of the Thermaltake Versa H17. There's a version with a tempered glass side panel, but that makes it a bit more expensive than you should reasonably pay for this case. Then there's a version with an acrylic side panel, and the version that I'll be reviewing today, which just has a solid metal side panel. This version of the case goes for exactly $40. Now, first off, let's just deal with the elephant in the room, which is the front airflow performance. And honestly, this case has a very restrictive front panel. It's got these two slits on the side, which is supposed to give you airflow, but they're really restrictive. The only real place for air to come in is this slot in the bottom of the front panel, but honestly, it isn't enough in my opinion. Now, while talking about the front panel, let's look at the front panel I/O. And it's not too bad on this case, especially for $40. You get a USB 3.0 port, you get two USB 2.0 ports, and then a headphone, a microphone jack, a reset button, and a big start button. Now, honestly, the front I/O is not bad for a $40 case. But I think the Cooler Master Q300 has a better approach because it gives up the USB 2.0 ports for two USB 3.0 ports, which I think is better. And another issue that I have with the front panel I/O is the actual cables that lead to your motherboard are quite badly dealt with in the top there, and it makes it really difficult for you to cable manage it in a way that it doesn't look like a bird's nest. And then another issue with these actual cables is that they're not sleeved all the way to the connector, so it means that it's quite easy to have a ketchup and mustard effect on the actual motherboard end of the connector. Although, because it's an mATX case, once you have a graphics card actually occupying that slot, you can't really see those cables, so that's a bit of a benefit. Now let's get back to the actual airflow situation in this case. Now it comes with one 120mm fan occupying the rear exhaust slot in the case. Now it's not a great fan, but it does have one huge redeeming factor, which is the fact that it doesn't use a Molex connector, which is a cardinal sin in case design, and some more expensive cases actually do make this mistake. It uses a 3-pin cable, which you can just plug straight into your motherboard. And then there's also a space for either a 120mm or a 140mm fan in the top, which also has a magnetic dust filter, so you could use it as an intake. And quite hilariously, this case does support a 360mm radiator in the front, although this cutout in the basement doesn't give you a huge amount of space for a radiator and fans, so I think a 240mm radiator would work better. Although I wouldn't really recommend putting a radiator in the front of this case just because of how bad the front airflow is. Now, with all of the talk of airflow out of the way, let's have a look at the actual thermal performance of this case. Now, the system that I'm using to test the thermals here is actually a system that I built in a recent video about buying a PC with my first ever YouTube paycheck. It's got an AMD 2400G CPU in it with a stock cooler, and then it's got a GTX 1660 Ti in it, which is an Asus Phoenix variant. And honestly, its thermals are really bad even in the best situation, so it may not be the most fair use case. Now, as far as the actual thermals go, while running Firmark on the GPU and AIDA64 on the CPU and the motherboard, both the CPU and the graphics card actually thermally throttled during this very intensive test. However, temperatures weren't much of a problem during gaming, except for the graphics card again, but honestly that GPU will probably thermal throttle if you have an air conditioner pointed straight at it. Honestly, it's not Asus's finest hour, but I may actually do a separate review video on that graphics card. Now, one of the most important questions around any case is what is it actually like to build in? And honestly, I have no complaints. It's really easy to build in. Cable management was quite easy, although there aren't any rubber grommets or cable covers over the actual routing holes. but still, it wasn't too much of an issue. You can fit pretty much any size GPU in this case, although I would say that if you have a very short graphics card like this Asus Phoenix variant, it's quite difficult to neatly route the power cable to the GPU. Although, if your motherboard does have a different front I/O layout and you've got the USB 3 on the right side instead of the bottom, you may be able to route the cable up the bottom, but I honestly didn't have any space for that. Neko-chan! We got a new cat! Check him out! Look at him, he's so noisy. Bye-bye. Oh, don't jump! Don't jump! Don't do that to yourself, you're gonna die. But honestly, the full power supply basement cover does make cable management much easier because it's kind of a hole you can just stuff everything in. Now the power supply does have a dust filter for its intake, although the dust filter isn't magnetic or on a slidey thing, but honestly, what can you expect for a $40 case? And then as far as SSD or hard drive installation goes, it's actually not as easy as having just a caddy that you can clip in, but it's not too difficult. How it works is you screw 3 rubber grommeted screws into the SSD, and then you slide it into position, and then to lock it down, there's a 4th screw that you actually have to tighten down. And because of the fact that there's one specific screw hole that you have to use to lock it down, it could mean that you could use the wrong grommeted screws and then have to kind of rearrange all of them, but honestly that could just be because I'm a bit incompetent. In conclusion, I think the Versa H17 is a really great case for the budget. If you have about $40, this would be on the top of my list of recommendations. And honestly, I think the fact that it's an mATX form factor isn't much of an issue because a lot of the cheaper B450 motherboards from AMD are actually mATX. And the same goes for cheaper Intel motherboards, I think. However, the case isn't perfect. It doesn't have captive thumb screws on any of the side panels, but that's not a huge issue. It picks up fingerprints quite easily, so it does mean that you have to give it a good wipe down after you've built it, and the front airflow is really bad. And with that, it brings me to the end of the video. If you liked it, do like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. I've got an Instagram and a Twitter account, so go check those out. And until the next video, bye-bye.